The thing about hitting rock bottom is that you don't always know it's the bottom until you're already sitting in it, counting the cracks in the floor. That's what Lila was doing the night everything changed. Counting. Because counting was the only thing she was good at, and right now she needed to be good at something. 42 floor tiles between the bar entrance and the back wall. 11 bottles of top-shelf bourbon lined up behind the bartender like soldiers at attention. 3 exits. One of them blocked by a man in a black suit who hadn't moved in 20 minutes and whose eyes had tracked every person who walked through the door. She wasn't paranoid. She was observant. There's a difference, and most people never learn it until it's too late. Lila ordered a club soda because she couldn't afford anything else, and she had exactly enough pride left not to admit that out loud. And she spread the papers across the bar like she owned the place. Spreadsheets. 12 months of someone else's numbers, red ink bleeding through every column. She'd been staring at them for 6 hours. They still told the same story. The restaurant she'd spent 4 years building from a broken lease and a salvaged commercial oven was gone. Not going. Gone. Her business partner, her fiancé, had signed the dissolution papers that morning, filed them, shaken hands with the buyer. Then he'd gone home and told her he was in love with her older sister. She hadn't screamed. She'd said, very calmly, "Which one?" He'd blinked. "You have more than one sister." "I have 3, she'd said. I needed to know which one. It was Daphne. Of course it was Daphne. Daphne, who had borrowed Lila's car for 6 months and returned it with a cracked bumper and no explanation. Daphne, who had cried at Lila's engagement party until everyone was comforting her instead of celebrating Lila. Daphne, who had once said with genuine sincerity, "I just think you have too much going on in your life to be truly happy." She'd been right as it turned out, just not in the way she meant. So here Lila was, bar's stool at the far end of the counter, club's soda going flat, spreadsheets that documented in precise numerical detail the exact cost of trusting the wrong people. The restaurant liquidation would cover the shared debts. Her personal savings, 4 years of skipped vacations and second-hand furniture and eating staff meal instead of actual dinner, would cover approximately 3 months of rent if she was careful. She was always careful. It hadn't saved her yet. The man sat down next to her without asking. She didn't look up. "The seat to your left is also open," she said. "I'm aware." His voice, formatively low. Not the kind of low men sometimes do when they're trying to sound important. Just low. Like it had always lived in the lower registers and had no interest in climbing. "Then we understand each other," Lila said, and went back to her spreadsheet. He didn't leave. She could see his hands in her peripheral vision. He'd ordered something neat, whiskey. The bartender had reached for the good shelf without being asked, and he set the glass down with the careful deliberateness of someone who was used to making precise movements. His cufflinks were plain. Silver, no monogram, no pattern. The suit was dark grey and had clearly been made for him by someone who charged more for the fitting than most people earned in a month. "You're doing the math wrong," he said. She looked up. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the spreadsheet, and there was nothing predatory about it. Nothing curious, even. He looked like a man who had seen a lot of spreadsheets, and this one had simply failed to clear his bar. "I'm not doing the math wrong," she said. "Column F. You're calculating the net loss before subtracting the deferred liability on line 40. It changes your number by about $12,000. Lila stared at him. Then she looked at column F. She looked back at him. "Who are you?" she said. He finally turned his head. He was older than she'd expected. Mid-40s, maybe, with grey coming in at the temples and a jaw that looked like it had been built for bad news. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, thin and white, the kind that had healed a long time ago but never quite disappeared. His eyes were dark and completely, unsettlingly calm. "Someone who reads spreadsheets," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." She should have taken her papers and moved. She knew that. Every sensible instinct she possessed said, "Pick up your things, thank him politely for the accounting note, and go sit somewhere else. You've had a catastrophic enough day. You don't need to add whatever this is." Instead, she pulled the spreadsheet closer and looked at line 40. He was right. She fixed the number in pencil. The column recalculated in her head in about 4 seconds. 12,300 and change. Still devastating. Less devastating than she'd thought. "Thank you," she said ungraciously. "You're welcome," he said, like she'd been perfectly pleasant about it. They sat in silence for a while. The bar was filling up around them. A Thursday night crowd, business dinners in the booths, a bachelorette party materializing near the back with the sudden and alarming speed that bachelorette parties always do. Lila watched the man in the black suit near the exit shift his weight slightly. She watched a second man she hadn't noticed before appear near the hallway to the restrooms. She catalogued them automatically, the way she catalogued everything. Exits, numbers, variables. "You have 3 people watching the room," she said. The man beside her took a sip of his whiskey. 4, he said. She didn't look around for the 4th one. She didn't need to. "Are you expecting trouble?" she asked. "I'm always expecting trouble." He set the glass down. "It's more efficient." She wasn't sure if that was menacing or just practical. In her experience, those 2 things weren't mutually exclusive. His name, she learned over the next 40 minutes. Because she didn't leave, because the bachelorette party had annexed the other end of the bar and retreat was logistically complicated, was Renfrew. Just Renfrew. He offered it the way some people offered their card, flatly, without ceremony, like it was information he was providing rather than a piece of himself. He did not ask her name. He did not ask what the spreadsheets were for, or why she was sitting alone at a bar on a Thursday ordering club soda, with the body language of someone who had recently survived something. He looked at her numbers when she showed him a second sheet. She wasn't sure why she did that. Some impulse she'd examine later, and he said 3 things that were true and 1 that she hadn't considered. She found herself talking. Not about the catastrophe. Not directly. She talked about the numbers the way she always talked about numbers. The same way some people talked about music or weather. Naturally, like breathing. She talked about the structure of a small restaurant's cash flow and why it was almost always the thing that killed them, not the food, not the rent, not even the concept. The cash flow, the gap between when you paid and when you got paid. The gap that widened always until it swallowed you whole. Renfrew listened. He didn't nod along. He didn't offer sympathy, which she would have hated. He listened like a man reviewing testimony, attentive, precise, occasionally asking a question so specific that she had to stop and think before she answered. "You're not in the restaurant business," she said. "No, what business are you in?" He considered the question like he was deciding how much of an answer to give. "Debt," he said finally, "and the collection of it." Something shifted in the air. Lila noted it the way she noted everything, filed it, kept going. "Collections as in people owe me things," he said, "and they pay them, eventually." She should have left. She knew she should have left. The bachelorette party was singing something. A man at the booth behind her laughed too loudly. The bartender was working fast, 3 cocktails at once. The man near the exit had been replaced by a different man in an almost identical suit, the changeover so smooth she'd nearly missed it. "That sounds," Lila said carefully, "like a complicated business." "Most businesses are complicated," Renfrew said. "The ones that look simple are usually just better at hiding the structure." "Is that a threat or a business philosophy?" "Both," he said. "Usually." She looked at him directly for the first time in a while. He was watching her with that same calibrated calm, and she had the sudden disorienting sensation of being understood. Not comforted, not flattered, not handled. Understood. The way numbers understood each other, precise and without sentiment. She was so tired of sentiment. "My fiancé left me for my sister," she said, "today, and he also sold our restaurant, which he co-owned, which I built, which I—" She stopped, restarted. "The spreadsheets are what's left. I'm figuring out what I have, and what do you have? 12,000 more than I thought," she said. "Thanks to you." He almost smiled. Not quite. A slight shift at the corner of his mouth that might have been recognition. "What will you do?" he asked. "I don't know yet. I'm still in the accounting phase." "The accounting phase," he repeated. "It's what I do when I don't know what to do. I count things. I figure out what's real. Then I decide." He was quiet for a moment. That, he said, is actually more sophisticated than most people's process. Coming from anyone else, it would have sounded like flattery. Coming from him in that measured, uninflected way, it sounded like a statement of fact. She didn't know whether to be pleased or unsettled. She was both. They were still sitting there at 11 when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, didn't answer, just looked, and then he put it away. "I have to go," he said. "Okay." He stood. He was taller than she'd registered. She'd been focused on his hands and his eyes and his accounting skills, and had somehow missed the height. He reached into his jacket. She tracked the movement automatically, couldn't help it, and placed a business card on the bar beside her spreadsheet. "Just a name, Renfrew, and a number. If you decide to do something with those numbers," he said, instead of just counting them. She looked at the card. She looked at him. "That's a very oblique offer," she said. "It's not an offer yet," he said. "It's a possibility." He left. The four men she could and couldn't see arranged themselves and left with him, smooth and unhurried like water pulling back from a shoreline. The bar felt different after, less weighted. Lila sat there for another hour. She fixed the rest of the spreadsheet. She ordered a real drink, something cheap, the second cheapest thing on the menu, because some limits she held. She looked at the card twice. She didn't throw it away. 3 days later, she called the number. She'd spent those 3 days in her sister Corinne's spare room. Not Daphne, the other one, the one who had reacted to the news by showing up with a casserole and absolutely no questions, which was exactly what Lila needed, and she'd slept badly and eaten the casserole and worked through every remaining option in the precise, methodical way she worked through everything. The list was short. Her savings, a possible consulting gig from a former colleague, her degree, which was in accounting, which she hadn't used in 4 years because she'd been too busy running a restaurant, and the card. She'd told herself she was calling to ask a clarifying question. She was not, she told herself firmly, calling because she'd spent 3 days thinking about a man she didn't know who had read her spreadsheet and told her the truth. She was calling for professional reasons. Renfrew answered on the second ring. "Lila," he said. She hadn't told him her name. "How did you? You left your business registration in the spreadsheet footer," he said. "Lila Pren, operating partner." She'd forgotten. She sat with that for a second. "I'm calling," she said, "because I wanted to understand what you meant about the possibility." A pause. Not uncomfortable. Renfrew, she was learning, used silence the way other people used punctuation. "I need someone who can read numbers the way you read them," he said. "Not an accountant. An analyst. Someone who can look at a structure and tell me what's wrong before it becomes a problem. For your collections business." "For my organization," he said, "which is broader than collections." "How much broader?" Another pause. "Significantly," he said. She should have said no. She knew, with the same clarity she knew line 40 of the spreadsheet, exactly what kind of man sent 4 people to watch a room at a bar on a Thursday night. Exactly what kind of organization was significantly broader than debt collection. She wasn't naive. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where you learned early the difference between the men who broke the rules and the men who enforced them and the men who simply were the rules. Walking around in expensive suits with their calm eyes and their scar tissue and their efficient silences. But she was also 31 years old, sleeping in her sister's spare room, with 4 years of work dissolved into someone else's signature on a document she hadn't known, was being filed until it was done. She was tired of being the person who played it safe and still ended up here. "What does it pay?" she asked. He told her. She didn't say anything for 3 seconds. "That's," she said. "Yes," he said. "That's more than the restaurant made in a year." "I'm aware of what restaurants make," he said. "I own several." She believed him. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me." She laid them out. She'd spent the 3 days writing them down, half because she was practical, and half because she'd needed something to do with her hands. She would not be asked to falsify records. She would not be involved in anything that required her to interact with law enforcement in a deceptive capacity. She would keep her own copies of everything she worked on. She would require 1 week's notice before any termination, and she would be compensated for that week regardless. Renfrew listened to all of it without interrupting. "Those are reasonable conditions," he said. "I know they are. You're not going to ask about the nature of the work itself, what you might be looking at." "I'm going to assume," Lila said, "that I'll figure that out when I get there, and that if I see something I can't live with, I'll tell you, and if I don't accept that condition, then I won't take the job." "Silence. You'll start Monday," he said. The offices were in a building downtown that looked like a mid-tier import-export firm on the outside and operated, she discovered quickly, like the kind of organization that had simply decided bureaucracy was something that happened to other people. There were 7 people who reported to Renfrew directly. She became the 8th. Her job, as she came to understand it, was this: Renfrew's operation ran money through enough layers that the original source was never obvious. This was not, he explained to her in their first real meeting. Actual office, actual chairs. Daylight. Something he was hiding from her. "I'm telling you what it is," he said, "because you'll figure it out in a week regardless, and I prefer accurate information to comfortable omissions." "That's a remarkably honest approach for someone in your line of work," Lila said. "It's not honesty," he said. "It's efficiency. Lies require maintenance. The truth is self-sustaining." She thought about that for a long time afterward. Her job was to find the errors, the places where the layers didn't align, where a number didn't match its shadow, where the structure was technically sound but practically exposed. She realized after the first week, doing what she'd always done. She was reading the space between what the numbers said and what they meant, but at a scale that made her old spreadsheets look like grocery lists. She was very good at it, Renfrew noticed. He didn't say so directly. He would look at the analysis she left on his desk and occasionally ask a follow-up question, and the question was always the one she'd anticipated, and she'd have the answer ready, and something in his expression would shift. Almost nothing, but she was learning to read it the way she read everything else, precisely. She told herself she was not doing this. She told herself she was doing a job for pragmatic reasons, and that she was keeping her copies, and that the day she saw something she couldn't live with, she was going to say so and leave. She told herself this every morning. She also found herself staying late, not because he asked her to, because the work was interesting in a way that almost nothing had been interesting since the first year of the restaurant, before the money got tight, and her fiancé started coming home later, and she'd stopped looking too closely at where they were headed. She was looking now. One night, late, maybe 10 o'clock, the building quiet, Renfrew came into her office. She'd been there long enough that it felt like her office. Her pencils in the cup, her reading lamp at the precise angle she needed it, her own additional backup drive sitting beside the company one. He sat down in the chair across from her desk, which she found mildly alarming because he almost always stood. "There's a problem," he said. "Which one?" "The Aldrin account." She knew the Aldrin account. She'd flagged it 3 weeks ago, a subsidiary's subsidiary, 2 layers deep, running a timing discrepancy that was either an error or deliberate. She'd noted it. She'd sent the note. She'd been waiting. "Someone moved money out of the buffer account," she said, "before I flagged it. Yes, so they knew I was going to find it." "Yes," she put her pencil down. "That's not an accounting problem." "No," Renfrew said. "It's not." He looked at her steadily. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, not quite concern, nothing so open as that. Something more like the awareness of a variable he'd underestimated, which, she supposed, might be her. "How many people knew you'd hired an analyst?" she asked. "Everyone in this building, and outside it." A beat, fewer. She understood what he wasn't saying. "You think whoever moved the money knew I was coming," she said, "before I got here, which means they knew you were hiring. Which means—" "Yes," he said. She sat back. She did the math, not the accounting math, the other math, the human kind, which she was worse at, but not useless. Someone inside, or someone close to inside. The circle was small. Renfrew had told her that himself. "What do you need from me?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "The ability to tell me which account it came from," he said. "The original. Not the transfer, I can trace that myself, where it started. She turned back to the files. She had a copy. Of course she had a copy. "Give me until morning," she said. He stood. She expected him to leave. "Why haven't you quit?" he said. She looked up. "I've given you sufficient cause," he said. "Not a question. You've seen enough to understand clearly what this is. You flagged the Aldrin discrepancy in week 3, which means you understood in week 3. You've had 6 weeks since then to walk out." "I keep my copies," she said. That's not an answer. She thought about it. The real answer was something she'd been turning over for 9 weeks, examining from different angles, the way she examined a set of books that didn't quite balance. "The work is real," she said finally. "I haven't been doing work that's real in a long time." I forgot what it felt like. He looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than his pauses usually did. "I'll be back at 6, he said. "I'll have it." She had it by 4. Not just the origin account, the full structure, who had accessed it, when, from which terminal, through which proxy. She could see the shape of it. She could see the intention in it, which was the thing she was good at that computers weren't. Not the numbers themselves, but the reason behind them. The logic, the hand that had made the choice. She printed it out. All of it. 1 copy for Renfrew, 1 for herself. When he arrived at 6, she was still at her desk, 2nd cup of coffee, watching the early light come through the window. She slid the folder across to him. He read it standing. He read fast. She'd noticed that about him. He consumed information the way other people breathed, like it was necessary rather than effortful. He went through 8 pages in 3 minutes. He closed the folder. "Garrett," he said. Not surprise. More like confirmation of something he'd suspected and hadn't wanted to be right about. "He had access and motive," she said. "The timing on the transfers aligns with the days he was in the building alone. I can't prove intent from the numbers alone, but the pattern is enough," Renfrew said. He was quiet for a moment. "He's been with me for 11 years, he said. She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. The number was what it was. "You knew," she said. "When you came to me last night, you already suspected him." "I suspected," he said. "I didn't know, and you needed me to tell you. I needed someone I hadn't known for 11 years to tell me," he said. "Someone who would see the numbers and not the man." She understood that. She understood it completely. It was the hardest thing about numbers. They were honest in a way that people found difficult to accept, because the truth in a spreadsheet didn't care about your history with it. "What will you do?" she asked. "What I always do," he said. She didn't ask what that meant. She'd learned not to ask questions she wasn't prepared to receive answers to. That was another thing she'd figured out in 9 weeks. He set the folder down on her desk. "This changes your value to me," he said. Meaning the arrangement needs to be renegotiated. She looked at him. "I have conditions," she said. "I still have them, I know, and I'm adding one." He waited. "If you ever make a decision that I believe creates a direct legal exposure for me," she said, "I walk, with my copies, and we never speak of it again. That's a unilateral exit clause." "Yes," she said, "and if I refuse?" She looked at him evenly. "Then I leave now. Before you do whatever you're about to do about Garrett, which means I never saw this analysis, which means you're starting over." He looked at her for a long moment. The window behind her was getting brighter. She could hear the first sounds of the city waking up. "Accepted," he said. She nodded. She picked up her coffee. "I'm going to need a raise," she said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. "I expected that," he said. "And breakfast. I've been here since midnight. I'll have someone bring something, not pastries, something real. Eggs." He looked at her with an expression she was still learning to read. Not warmth, exactly, nothing that uncomplicated, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked like recognition of a particular and specific thing, seen clearly. "Eggs," he said. "I've been counting your money since midnight," she said. "I've earned eggs." He left. She turned back to her window. The city was all numbers from up here. Windows and grids and lines of traffic she could calculate into flow and variable and pattern. She was good at this. She'd always been good at this. She'd just spent a long time doing it in a room that turned out to have the wrong people in it. She thought about the restaurant, about the 4 years and the spreadsheets and the fiancé, who had looked at everything she'd built and decided someone else was more interesting. She thought about Daphne, who had borrowed the car and never fixed the bumper. She thought about column F and a man who had read her numbers in a bar without being asked and told her the truth without making it mean anything other than what it meant. The eggs arrived, real ones, scrambled, with toast, a second coffee better than what she'd been drinking. She didn't know what she was building here. She wasn't sure she was supposed to know yet. She was still in the accounting phase, counting what was real, figuring out what she had, deciding from there. She had her copies. She had her conditions. She had the work, which was real, and the window and the eggs. For now, that was the number. For now, that was enough.